The BBC studios in London hummed with a kind of electricity that only live television could produce. Cameramen adjusted tripods, producers whispered last-minute instructions into headsets, and the iconic red sofa glowed under the studio lights as though it were another character in the drama that was about to unfold. Graham Norton, the king of sharp wit and mischief, sat at his desk flipping through cards. He wore that trademark grin, a grin that could disarm celebrities one moment and skew them with a sly remark the next. The audience had filed in earlier, buzzing with chatter. Everyone knew this wasn't just another Friday night taping. Tonight's guest was different. Not an actor promoting a blockbuster, not a pop star debuting a new single. Tonight, the man of the hour was Prince Harry, the Duke who walked away from the monarchy, the royal who had sparked headlines, documentaries, books, and endless debates. The producers had hyped it as an intimate and candid conversation. The tabloids had promised fireworks, and Graham himself had teased on the radio that morning. Let's just say the sofa has hosted drama before, but tonight it may need a seatbelt. As the theme music began to play, the audience clapped in rhythm, the familiar tune bouncing around the set. Graham looked into the nearest camera, his smile widening. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said in his lilting Irish tone, "welcome back to the show. Tonight, on the sofa, we have music, laughter, and, wait for it, actual royalty. Yes, we've finally gone up market." The crowd roared with laughter and applause. Graham let it settle, his eyes twinkling as he teased the card in his hand. "You've seen him in uniform. You've seen him in headlines. You've seen him in the crown. Well, not really, but close enough. Please welcome the Duke of Sussex himself, Prince Harry." The studio erupted. The doors at stage left opened, and Prince Harry strode onto the stage. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit paired with a crisp white shirt, tireless. It was the same balance he always tried to strike, casual yet regal, accessible yet unmistakably aristocratic. He waved briefly. That familiar boyish grin stretched across his face, and for a moment, the tension in the room melted into admiration. The cameras tracked him as he crossed the stage, shaking Graham's hand firmly before settling onto the far end of the sofa. The applause thundered, then slowly tapered off. Graham leaned forward, eyes gleaming with playful reverence. "Your Royal Highness," Graham began with mock solemnity, dipping his head in exaggerated respect. "Or should I just say Harry? I don't want to get told off by palace etiquette." Harry chuckled, shaking his head. "Harry's fine. Always has been." The audience laughed warmly, clapping again. Graham sipped his water and smirked. "Well, it's not often we get royalty on this sofa. I think the last time was when Dame Judi Dench played Queen Victoria, so you're in good company." Harry smiled politely. "I'll take that as a compliment." For the first few minutes, the mood was light, almost charming. Graham, ever the entertainer, began with easy questions. "How's life these days?" he asked, his tone casual. "California treating you well? Sunshine, avocados, and all that?" Harry chuckled softly, clasping his hands. "It's good. Busy, obviously, but more private, more focused. I've been working on projects around mental health, supporting veterans, and trying to spend more time with family. So, yeah, it's been good." The audience clapped again, nodding along as though reassured by his words. Graham tapped his cards. Yes, family. You've got 2 little ones now. That must be chaos in itself. Do you get any sleep? Or is it 3 a.m. bottle duty for you as well?" Harry's grin widened slightly. "Plenty of late nights, but that's part of the joy, isn't it? Parenthood makes you see things differently. I've learned patience, more than I ever thought I could." The audience chuckled and sighed with approval. It was smooth sailing. For 5 minutes, the studio was filled with laughter and warm anecdotes. Graham cracked jokes about nappy duty. Harry played along gamely, and the audience basked in the rare sight of a prince bantering with a comedian on national television. But if there was one thing everyone knew about Graham Norton, it was this: the charm was just the appetizer. The bite always came later. After the initial small talk, Graham leaned back in his chair, glancing at the card in his hand with a mischievous glint. He raised his eyebrows theatrically. "Now, Harry," he began, his tone still friendly but edged with curiosity. "We've talked about California sunshine, fatherhood, avocados, but we can't ignore the rather large palace-shaped elephant in the room." The audience chuckled nervously. Harry shifted slightly in his seat, his smile still in place but tighter now. "Your decision to step back from the royal family," Graham continued, his grin playful but his eyes sharp. "Was it stepping back, stepping down, stepping away? I keep losing track. What do you call it these days?" A ripple of laughter swept through the audience. Harry's jaw flexed almost imperceptibly, though he forced a polite smile. "We just wanted to focus on our family and our work," he said evenly. "That's all. There's no mystery to it." "Ah," Graham said lightly, flipping his card. "So it wasn't running away? Because to everyone else, one day you're a prince waving from a balcony, and the next, you're in California signing Netflix deals. Sound a bit like a sprint." The audience chuckled again, unsure if they should. Harry leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. "It's not running away if you're leaving something toxic behind," he replied quickly, the smile on his face not quite reaching his eyes. The air shifted slightly. Graham raised his eyebrows, his grin unfaltering. "Toxic. That's quite a word. You've used it before, about the press, about the palace, about traditions. But was there anything about royal life you actually liked?" Harry uncrossed his arms, his tone noticeably cooler now. "That's not really a fair question. I served my country and my family for years. I did my duty. But when it started to hurt the people I loved, it was time to go." The audience murmured softly. A few nodded, others glanced at each other. The atmosphere was shifting, slowly, almost imperceptibly, but definitely shifting. Graham's eyes glinted as he tapped his card. Hurting because of the press, or because of the family itself? Harry's voice dropped half an octave. Both. The temperature in the studio seemed to drop a degree. The audience felt it. Graham felt it. And Harry, jaw set and eyes fixed, looked as though he were already preparing for battle. For Graham, it was the smell of blood in the water. For Harry, it was the sound of the first match striking the powder keg. And the audience, perched on the edge of their seats, knew it too. The laughter that had filled the room moments ago was gone, replaced by a silence so sharp it could have cut glass. What had begun as a charming chat was tilting, slowly, dangerously, towards something else. Something that would burn. The red sofa had hosted everything from A-list movie stars to stand-up comedians, but tonight it felt like it was carrying the weight of a trial bench. The laughter had thinned. The applause breaks were fewer. The audience, who'd expected playful banter, now leaned forward, sensing that the conversation was sliding into territory where the jokes would sting more than they soothed. Graham, relaxed as ever, shuffled his cards and looked up with that same grin. But his tone, while polite, carried a thread of steel. "Of course, Harry," he said smoothly, "you've mentioned toxicity. Strong word, isn't it? Some might say overused. Toxic press, toxic palace, toxic traditions. But when people talk about Meghan," he paused deliberately, letting the name sink into the air. "That word seems to come up a lot. Do you think your wife ever truly fit into the royal family?" A ripple ran through the audience. Some gasped softly, others shifted uneasily in their seats. Harry's smile evaporated. His posture stiffened, his hands clasping tightly in his lap. He looked at Graham squarely. "That's nonsense. And frankly, it's a ridiculous question." The firmness in his tone snapped across the room like a whip. Graham raised his hands theatrically, his grin unshaken. "No offense intended, Harry. I'm not making the claim. I'm simply voicing what people out there say. These are the conversations in pubs, in newspapers, in the endless internet forums where people think they know better. Don't shoot the messenger." Harry leaned forward slightly, his voice clipped. "Maybe people shouldn't say things they know nothing about." The audience let out a nervous murmur. One or two clapped hesitantly, as though trying to rally behind him. Graham chuckled softly, tilting his head like a cat toying with prey. "All right, fair enough. But you can't deny it, can you? Meghan was always at the center of the storm. From the tabloids, yes, but also from palace insiders. Some staff have described her as demanding, even difficult. Do you think they were all wrong? Harry's eyes narrowed. His voice rose a fraction, though he kept it steady. Those staff should have had the courage to say things to my face instead of hiding behind anonymity. Cowards, the lot of them. The audience gasped audibly this time, the word cowards hitting the air like a stone dropped in still water. Graham steepled his fingers, leaning forward with quiet composure. That's quite an accusation. But there does seem to be a pattern. Different sources, same claims. Doesn't it ever cross your mind that maybe, just maybe, there's a sliver of truth in what they said? Harry exhaled sharply, his jaw clenched. What it tells me is that the institution was threatened by a woman who wouldn't just nod and smile. Meghan wasn't difficult. She was strong, and that scared them. A smattering of applause broke out in the audience, but it was cautious, fragmented. Graham nodded slowly, as if he'd expected the answer. Then he tilted his head again. So, she was strong, and you supported her. Admirable. But let me put it another way. You left your family, your country, your duties, everything you've been raised for, to stand by her side. Do you ever wonder if the cost was too high? If the bridges you burned can never be rebuilt? Harry's lips pressed into a thin line. He looked down briefly, then back up, his eyes sharper than before. I'd burn every bridge 100 times over if it meant protecting my wife and children. Family should have stood by me. They didn't. That was their choice. The audience was dead quiet now, the weight of the words pressing into the silence. Graham smiled thinly, flipping his card again. But Harry, you keep talking about family letting you down, about the toxicity of the palace. Yet here you are, again and again, on television, in interviews, in documentaries, always telling your side. If you wanted true privacy, why not just fade into the background? Why not live quietly, away from all of this? Harry let out a laugh, but it was short, brittle. You really don't get it, do you? Graham leaned forward slightly, the grin tugging at the corner of his lips. Oh, I think I get it. But maybe you should explain it for the millions watching at home. Harry's eyes flashed with irritation. It's not about disappearing. It's about telling our story on our terms. Do you think I should just sit back and let the tabloids destroy us? Let them twist every word, every gesture, into something ugly? No, we take control. That's not contradiction. That's survival. The room shifted again. The audience murmured nervously, some nodding in sympathy, others glancing at each other in doubt. Graham gave a small shrug. So the problem isn't with publicity, then. It's just with who controls it. That's the game, isn't it? You want the spotlight, but only on your terms. Do you see how that might come across as hypocritical? The word landed like a slap. Harry's back straightened, his jaw tightening visibly. He stared at Graham, his voice low but seething. Hypocrisy is when an institution claims to care about service and duty, but sacrifices its own members for good headlines. Hypocrisy is pretending to protect while feeding us to the wolves. Don't talk to me about hypocrisy. The audience gasped again. The tension was electric now, so thick it buzzed in the air. Graham nodded slowly, his smile thinner now, less playful. Strong words, Harry. Very strong words. But you must know the public sees contradictions. They want to root for you. They want to believe your story. Yet every time you speak, the bitterness shows. Doesn't that concern you? Harry's breathing had quickened, though he tried to hide it. He leaned forward, his eyes locked onto Graham. What concerns me is people like you dressing up mockery as journalism. What concerns me is that you don't care about truth. You care about ratings. The audience erupted into a mixture of gasps and applause, torn between sides. Graham sat back, his grin cooling into something sharper. And you, Harry, don't care about questions. You care about control. That's the difference between us. The studio lights seemed hotter now, the famous red sofa suddenly less comfortable. The tension between them was no longer just simmering. It was boiling, the pot threatening to spill over. And the audience, caught in the crossfire, knew they weren't just watching an interview anymore. They were watching the beginning of a war. The hum of the cameras felt louder now, almost oppressive, as though every lens in the studio had sharpened its focus. The red sofa, usually a symbol of levity and laughter, had transformed into something resembling a witness stand. Prince Harry sat rigid, his fingers tapping the armrest of the sofa in an unconscious rhythm, his jaw set as though he were bracing for impact. Across from him, Graham Norton leaned forward, his cards fanned out like weapons he hadn't yet played. His smile was still there, but it had cooled, sharpened into something more deliberate. He knew what the audience knew. The interview had moved beyond small talk. They weren't here for charming anecdotes anymore. They were circling the heart of the storm. Graham's voice was calm, deceptively gentle, when he asked the question that made the entire room stiffen. "Harry, you've said often that what you and Meghan wanted was privacy, that you were suffocating under scrutiny, that you longed for a quieter life. But since stepping back, you've published a memoir, filmed a multi-part Netflix series, launched a podcast, and sat here on this very stage. So let me ask you plainly, how is this privacy?" The audience let out a collective murmur, some clapping faintly, others gasping. The tension spiked. Harry's eyes narrowed. He leaned forward, his voice clipped, deliberate. There's a very big difference between privacy and silence. Wanting privacy doesn't mean disappearing. It means controlling what parts of our lives are shared, instead of being hunted for every waking moment. Graham steepled his fingers, nodding. So it's about control. You choose when to be public, when to be private. Fair enough. But you must see how the public looks at that and thinks you can't have it both ways. You can't say you're retreating from the spotlight, then step into it with cameras rolling when it suits you. Harry's lips curled into a thin smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. So you'd rather we just shut up and let the press tear us apart? Is that it? That's what you want? That's what they want? For us to vanish so they can invent their own lies. The audience stirred again, their unease growing. Graham's grin widened slightly. Not vanish, no, but fade. Live quietly, as so many others have done. You wanted normalcy, yes? But what's normal about global book tours and Netflix deals? Doesn't that make you part of the very circus you claim to despise? Harry exhaled sharply through his nose, his composure cracking just a hair. His voice rose, steel lacing every word. It's not hypocrisy to tell my own story. Hypocrisy is pretending to protect family members while selling them out to the press. Hypocrisy is palace insiders whispering to tabloids while condemning me for speaking the truth. Don't talk to me about contradictions. Gasps rippled through the audience like a wave. Some clapped tentatively. Others whispered to each other, sensing the storm building. Graham leaned back in his chair, but his eyes never left Harry's. "You're angry, I can see that. And maybe you have every right to be. But Harry, can't you admit, even just a little, that part of the problem isn't just the institution or the press? That part of the problem might be the way you've chosen to handle it." Harry's hands clenched tighter in his lap. His voice was low now, simmering with barely contained fury. "I'll admit this. My mistake was thinking for 1 second that people like you cared about truth. You don't. You want headlines. You want drama. And you'll twist anything I say to get it." The words rang across the studio like an accusation hurled in a courtroom. Graham tilted his head slightly, almost sympathetically. Twisting, or reflecting back what the public already sees. That's my job, Harry, to ask what everyone else is asking. Harry's jaw flexed. Your job is to entertain by humiliating people. Let's call it what it is. The audience audibly gasped again, the shockwaves now palpable. Even the other guests on the sofa shifted uncomfortably, their smiles frozen, desperate not to be pulled into the crossfire. Graham didn't flinch. He leaned forward, his voice quieter, but sharper. Entertaining, yes, but humiliating, no. I've sat across from world leaders, rock stars, people who've lived through scandals twice as big as yours. And they answered hard questions without storming off. Why can't you? Harry's breathing had grown heavier. His chest rose and fell with controlled precision, but his eyes betrayed the fire beneath. He shook his head slowly, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. You think this is about hard questions. You think this is about me not being able to take it. This is about you, Graham. You sit there with your cards and your smirk and pretend you're just curious. But you don't want answers. You want a spectacle. The silence that followed was suffocating. The audience didn't dare move. Graham finally broke it with a soft chuckle. And yet, here you are, sitting on my sofa, giving me the spectacle you claim to despise. The words landed like a hammer. Harry leaned forward now, his voice a near growl. I came here because I thought maybe, just maybe, you'd be different. That you'd treat me like a human being, not a headline. Clearly, I was wrong. Graham's smile flickered, cooling into something closer to disdain. I've treated you exactly like every guest who's ever sat here, Harry. The only difference is, you don't like the mirror being held up to you. For the first time that night, the audience broke into scattered applause, though it was uneasy, uncertain. Harry's face flushed, his hand tightening around the microphone in his lap. His voice rose again, sharp and defensive. You're not holding up a mirror. You're holding up a funhouse distortion and calling it the truth. You don't care who gets hurt as long as people laugh. Graham's eyes glittered, his grin returning, but with a razor edge. And you don't care who gets silenced as long as your version is the only one left standing. The audience was silent now, every breath in the room bated. Harry leaned back, exhaling hard, his shoulders tense, his gaze fixed on the floor for a moment before snapping back to Graham. You think this is a joke? You think people's lives are punchlines? That's the difference between you and me. I've lived it. I've bled for it. And you, he jabbed a finger toward Graham. You sit there turning it into late-night entertainment. The words echoed in the studio, heavy, bitter, final. For a long beat, Graham said nothing. He just looked at Harry, his smile faint but unyielding, as though daring him to break. And in that silence, everyone watching knew they weren't just witnessing an interview. They were witnessing the slow unraveling of a prince. The air inside the studio had thickened, every word weighing heavier than the last. What began as witty banter had curdled into a test of endurance, a tug-of-war between a host wielding questions like scalpels and a prince fighting to shield old wounds from being torn open on live television. The red sofa, once a stage for playful stories, was now a battlefield strewn with half-hidden scars. Harry sat stiffly, his body angled slightly away from Graham as though to distance himself. His hands, once resting casually on his lap, now gripped the cushion so tightly the fabric bunched beneath his knuckles. The audience was frozen in place, their silence a collective breath held hostage. Graham shuffled his cards with a deliberate slowness, then looked up, his grin faint but unmistakable. "All right, Harry," he said smoothly, "we've spoken about the press, about privacy, about Meghan. Let's turn to something even more sensitive, family. You've referred to the royal family as the institution, which sounds more like a business than a home. But at the end of the day, they're still your blood. Do you still feel love for them?" Harry's jaw twitched. He inhaled through his nose, forcing his tone to stay measured. "Of course I love my family, but love doesn't mean much when loyalty only goes one way." The audience stared, whispers flitting across the rows. Graham tilted his head, feigning innocence. "So, you feel they betrayed you?" Harry's eyes flicked upward, sharp, piercing. "I don't just feel it. I lived it. They stood by silently while lies were printed about us. Sometimes they fed those lies to protect others." Gasps rippled through the room. It was a heavy accusation, one that couldn't be laughed away. Graham, however, didn't flinch. His smile thinned, his voice dipping lower. "That's quite a charge, Harry. You're suggesting your own family, your brother, your father, sacrificed you to shield themselves." Harry leaned forward, his tone biting. "I'm not suggesting it. I'm saying it happened." The studio was hushed, the audience caught in the gravity of the claim. Even the other guests on the sofa, who had shrunk into the shadows, seemed to hold their breath. Graham let the silence hang for a moment, then tapped his card lightly on the desk. "And yet, Harry, from the outside, it looks very different. From the outside, it looks like you abandoned them. You left the country, you cut ties, you threw them under the bus in interviews. Do you ever wonder if maybe you were the one who betrayed them?" The question hit like a dart. Harry's face flushed. His lips parted, but no words came for a beat. Finally, he snapped, his voice colder than it had been all night. Betrayal is watching your wife be vilified and doing nothing. Betrayal is smiling for cameras while your family is suffering behind closed doors. If that's loyalty, you can keep it. The audience murmured, some clapping, others whispering nervously. Graham, unshaken, leaned forward slightly, his tone deceptively gentle. But Harry, isn't it possible they see your public criticisms as their own betrayal? They kept quiet, as tradition demands, while you've been loud, very loud. Do you see how that looks to them? Harry's eyes narrowed. Silence isn't dignity. It's complicity. They let the smear campaigns run unchecked. They didn't defend us. And now you expect me to feel guilty for speaking the truth? No, not anymore. The words landed heavy, a verbal wall no one could climb. Graham tilted his head, the grin fading entirely now. So, no regrets. Not even about the distance between you and your brother, the bond that once seemed unshakable. For the first time that night, Harry faltered. His eyes softened just a fraction, a shadow of pain crossing his face. But it lasted only a second before he steeled himself again. I can't regret protecting my family, my wife, my children. If that meant losing my brother's trust, that's on him, not me. The audience gasped again, the split visible now. Some nodding in sympathy, others visibly uncomfortable with the rawness of his words. Graham's voice dropped, silk wrapped around steel. So you don't think you've played any role in this divide? That you bear no responsibility for the fractures in your family? Harry's hands clenched tighter, his knuckles bone-white. His voice cracked with restrained fury. I've taken responsibility every day of my life. For my service, for my duty, for my role as a husband and father. What I won't take responsibility for is an institution that would rather see me broken than admit its own failings. The audience let out a collective breath, almost as though they'd been holding it. The tension was unbearable now. Graham leaned back, studying him with that signature gleam that was neither warm nor cruel, just relentless. Harry, do you ever stop to think that maybe, just maybe, the problem isn't the institution or the press, but you? That maybe the reason you feel isolated is because you've pushed everyone away. It was a knife slip between the ribs. Harry's head jerked up, his eyes blazing. No, he said flatly, his voice shaking with intensity. I was pushed. By them. By all of you. The words echoed in the studio, hanging heavy in the silence that followed. For a moment, Graham simply looked at him, the grin replaced by a colder expression, one of quiet challenge. Then, softly, he said, "You keep talking about being pushed. But sitting here tonight, it looks a lot like you're the one walking away." The audience gasped as if the oxygen had been sucked from the room. Harry leaned forward, his voice a near growl. "You don't know me. You don't know my family. So don't you dare sit there and tell me what it looks like." The camera zoomed in on his face, flushed, tense, raw with anger. The audience was silent, the tension electric, sparking across the room like static. For the first time, Graham dropped his grin entirely. His voice was low, firm, and edged with steel. "I don't need to know you, Harry. I just need to ask the questions the world is asking. If you can't answer them without exploding, maybe that says more about you than it does about me." Harry's lips pressed into a tight line, his chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. His composure was unraveling, thread by thread, right in front of millions. And everyone watching knew. It was only a matter of time before something snapped. The red sofa no longer looked inviting. It looked like a trap. Harry sat on its edge now, posture rigid, one hand gripping his knee as though anchoring himself in place. The boyish grin that once charmed the world was gone, replaced by tight lips and eyes that flickered with a storm barely contained. Across from him, Graham leaned back with deliberate ease, his hands clasped loosely in front of him, as if to signal he wasn't the one losing control here. His grin had softened, but the glint in his eye betrayed the thrill of a man who knew he'd struck nerves that couldn't be unstruck. The studio audience sensed it too. Nobody shifted in their seats anymore. Every cough was stifled, every breath measured. It was as if the room itself knew one wrong move would send the entire conversation into freefall. Graham adjusted his cards, though he hardly needed them now. The interview had taken on a life of its own. "Harry," he said lightly, but with that signature edge, "you've described the monarchy as toxic, the press as toxic, even your own family relationships as toxic. I wonder, do you ever worry that the common denominator might be you?" The words landed like a hammer. Harry blinked, his lips twitching in disbelief. He gave a sharp, humorless laugh that made the audience stir uneasily. "Ah, there it is," he muttered. "The classic deflection. If I speak about harm done to me, it must mean I'm the problem." Graham spread his hands innocently. "Not deflection, Harry. Just a question. When every bridge is burning behind you, sometimes people wonder if you're the one holding the matches." The audience gasped. A murmur swept across the rows, a mixture of admiration for Graham's audacity and nervous discomfort at the brazenness of the remark. Harry leaned forward, his voice steady but edged with venom. "Let me make this very clear. I didn't light those matches. I watched people I trusted burn the bridges down, one by one, and then blame me for walking away from the ashes." The words were sharp, nearly spat out, and for a moment even Graham hesitated, but only for a moment. He tapped his card lightly against the desk, eyes narrowing slightly. "Strong imagery. But Harry, you've built a career now on walking away. From the army, from the palace, from the UK. And now, here you are again, defending yourself while promoting books, documentaries, podcasts. Do you see how it looks from the outside? That maybe you're not a victim of the fire. You're profiting from the smoke." It was a surgical strike. The audience gasped audibly, some whispering, others shifting uncomfortably. Harry's face flushed crimson. His hands balled into fists, his knuckles pressing against the sofa's fabric. "Profiting," he snapped, his voice rising for the first time. "You think telling my story, our story, is about profit? You think standing up against lies and racism is some business venture?" Graham raised a brow, calm as ever. "Well, Netflix seems to think so." The crowd rippled with nervous laughter, some gasping, others chuckling, unsure which reaction was safe. Harry shot forward in his seat, his voice fierce now. "Do you have any idea what it's like to live through what we've lived through? To have your wife treated like a criminal for existing? To have your children attacked before they could even speak? If you think that's entertainment, Graham, then shame on you." The words cracked through the studio like thunder. A hush fell, so heavy it almost rattled the lights above. But Graham did not back down. His tone cooled, sharpened, steel wrapped in silk. "Harry, I don't think it's entertainment. I think it's accountability. And the moment anyone dares question you, suddenly it's shame on them. Isn't that a little too convenient?" Harry's breath came faster now, visible even in the camera close-up. His composure was unraveling, thread by thread. "You don't know the first thing about accountability," he said through clenched teeth. "You sit here, smirking, making a career out of mocking people's pain. That's not accountability, that's cruelty." Gasps echoed through the room. The audience could feel the shift. This wasn't just tension anymore. This was accusation. Graham's grin faded entirely now. His jaw tightened just slightly as he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his eyes locking onto Harry's. "Cruelty," he repeated softly, but his tone carried a bite. "You call me cruel for asking questions. And yet you've given interviews, you've written books, you've painted your family with the harshest brush possible. Was that cruelty too? Or just when someone points the mirror back at you?" Harry's chest rose and fell, his breathing sharp and audible. His lips curled into a bitter smile, though his eyes blazed with fury. "You think this is a mirror? This isn't a mirror, Graham. This is a circus. You invite people here, you make them laugh, and then you rip them apart for ratings. And everyone claps along like it's all harmless fun." He gestured broadly toward the audience, who now sat frozen, the discomfort palpable. "But it's not harmless, is it? It's humiliation, dressed up as entertainment." The audience murmured, caught between guilt and sympathy, unsure where to land. Graham held Harry's gaze, his own expression now stripped of levity. "And you," he said quietly, almost too softly, "you above all that. You can tear down your family on television, in print, on streaming platforms. But when someone dares push back, suddenly it's humiliation." Harry snapped upright, his voice loud now, reverberating off the studio walls. "Don't you dare compare what I've done to this. I spoke the truth about my life, about what we endured. That's not the same as you sitting there, mocking, twisting, belittling." The atmosphere was electric, every word sparking against the next like flint on steel. The tension was unbearable now, the kind of silence where even the cameramen seemed afraid to move. For the first time that night, Graham's smile returned, but it was no longer mischievous. It was razor-sharp. "You say you want truth, Harry. Well, truth isn't always flattering. Truth isn't always on your terms. And the moment it is, it stops being truth and starts being theater." The remark hit like a gut punch. Harry's face twisted with fury. His hand slapped against the sofa arm, the sound echoing like a gavel strike. "You want theater, Graham?" Harry spat, his voice quaking with anger. "Look around. This is your theater, your circus, and I'm the show pony you couldn't wait to break." The words hung in the air, raw, jagged, impossible to soften. The audience gasped once more, some clapping instinctively, others too shocked to move. And at that moment, everyone knew the interview was teetering on the very brink. The prince had gone from polite to furious, and the host from playful to unflinching. One more spark, one more sharp question, and the entire stage would ignite. The temperature is at boiling point now. The studio felt like a courtroom now. The red sofa, once a stage for laughter and light-hearted banter, had become the witness stand. Every camera zoom, every flicker of light felt like cross-examination. Harry's jaw was clenched so tightly the muscles twitched visibly beneath his skin. His hands, resting stiffly on his knees, looked ready to strike the air just to release the fury building inside. Across from him, Graham remained composed, too composed. His voice carried that infuriating calm, the tone of a man who knew he had the upper hand not because he shouted, but because he didn't have to. Graham leaned forward slightly, cards untouched now, his eyes locked on Harry's. "You've spoken at length about the toxicity of your upbringing, the cruelty of the palace, the relentless pressure of the press. And you've painted yourself as a survivor of that system. Fair enough. But let me ask you this." He paused, just long enough for the air to grow heavy. "Do you ever wonder if your mother would recognize the man you've become?" The silence that followed was devastating. The audience froze, wide-eyed. You could hear the faint hum of the studio lights, the slow, shallow breaths of people too afraid to exhale. Harry blinked hard, as though he'd been struck. His lips parted, but no words came at first. Then his voice broke through, low, sharp, and trembling with anger. "Don't you dare bring my mother into this." Graham's tone didn't falter. "But you brought her into this, Harry. Again and again. In interviews, in your book, in your speeches. You've invoked Diana's memory as justification for nearly every choice you've made. So the question isn't unfair. Would she approve of the path you've taken, or would she see it as bitterness disguised as survival?" The words cut like knives. Harry shot forward in his seat, his face flushed crimson. "You don't get to speak her name like that," he snapped, his voice rising. "You didn't know her. You don't know me. So don't you dare sit there with your smirk and pretend you understand what she'd think." The audience gasped. Some clapped, instinctively defending him, while others shifted uncomfortably. Graham didn't blink. "Then help us understand. Because right now, the public sees two things. They see Diana, remembered as compassionate, graceful, dignified even in the face of cruelty. And they see you, Harry, angry, combative, storming out of interviews. Is that the legacy you think she wanted for you?" Harry's chest heaved. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the sofa. His voice, when it came, was louder now, sharper, barely restrained. "My mother would have told me to get out. To protect my wife. To protect my children. She would have told me not to let this family destroy me the way it destroyed her. And I won't apologize for that. The declaration rang through the studio, but Graham was relentless. He tilted his head, his voice still maddeningly calm. Or perhaps she might have told you to fight with dignity, to stand firm without turning every stage into a battlefield. You've built your life on exposing grievances, Harry. But some would say you're not freeing yourself from her fate, you're repeating it. That was the match to the powder keg. Harry shot to his feet, microphone clattering against his chest as he rose. His voice thundered, reverberating through every corner of the studio. "Don't you dare," he roared. "Don't you dare suggest I'm repeating her fate. You think this is a game? You think you can use her name to get a gasp from the audience? You're disgusting." The audience audibly gasped, some even covering their mouths. The atmosphere had gone from tense to unbearable. Graham remained seated, but his eyes sharpened, steel beneath the calm. "Harry, this isn't about gasps. This is about truth. You say you want honesty, accountability, clarity. But when the questions get hard, you explode. When someone holds up the mirror, you shatter it. That's not strength, Harry. That's fragility." Harry's chest heaved as he pointed a trembling finger at Graham. "No. What's fragile is this pathetic excuse for a show. You sit here behind your desk, tearing people down, mocking them, laughing at them, and then you call it conversation. It's not. It's bullying. That's all it is." Graham's smile flickered, but only briefly. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low, precise. "Bullying is when power is abused. I don't have power over you, Harry. You do. You're the prince, the son of Diana, the man the world can't stop watching. And yet here you are, crumbling under the simplest questions." Harry's face twisted, his voice shaking with rage. "Simplest questions. You've spent the last half hour twisting every word I say, mocking my choices, dragging my family into this. And now you drag my mother into it too? That's not a question, Graham. That's an ambush." The audience murmured loudly now, the energy chaotic, split between shock and morbid fascination. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of fury on Harry's face, every calm, calculating look on Graham's. And then Graham delivered the line that sealed it. "You call it an ambush, Harry," he said softly, his voice like a blade. "But maybe what you really can't handle is accountability. Maybe you don't want conversation at all. Maybe you just want applause." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Harry's entire body trembled with fury. He yanked at the microphone clipped to his lapel, ripping it free with a sharp crackle that echoed through the speakers. "I'm done," he barked, his voice shaking with anger. "I will not sit here and be lectured by a smug talk show host who thinks cruelty is cleverness. You don't deserve my time, my words, or my story." The studio erupted, gasps, whispers, even a smattering of nervous applause. Harry threw the microphone onto the sofa with a sharp thud. His eyes blazed as he glared down at Graham one last time. "You're everything that's wrong with this industry," he spat. "You dress up humiliation as humor, and the world claps along. Well, not me. Not anymore." And with that, Harry turned sharply, his polished shoes striking the floor in thunderous echoes as he stormed toward the exit. The red sofa, once his stage, was abandoned behind him. The audience watched, transfixed, as he pushed through the studio doors with a violent shove. The sound of the door slamming reverberated like a final gavel strike. For several long, unbearable seconds, silence consumed the studio. No applause, no laughter, just the faint hiss of the microphones catching breaths. Graham remained seated, his face unreadable, his hands steepled before him. He let the silence linger, savoring the weight of it. And then, with devastating composure, he straightened his jacket and spoke. "Well," he said quietly, almost to himself, "that was festive." The audience laughed nervously, some clapping, some whispering, all still reeling from what they had just witnessed. And just like that, the breaking point had come and gone. The prince was gone. The sofa was empty, and the host remained unflinching. The studio door slammed with a force that made the floor seem to vibrate. Prince Harry was gone. His footsteps echoed for a few seconds in the corridor beyond before fading into silence, leaving behind nothing but a room full of stunned faces and the empty space he had once occupied on the famous red sofa. For a long moment, nobody moved. The audience sat frozen, their expressions caught somewhere between disbelief and fascination. A few mouths hung open, others whispered behind their hands, but the overall silence was heavy, suffocating. The cameras continued to roll, capturing every flicker of unease, every darting glance from the other guests who sat awkwardly at the far end of the sofa, wishing the stage would swallow them whole. Graham Norton didn't flinch. He sat where he was, posture relaxed, hands folded loosely on his desk as if he just finished an ordinary segment. Only the slight narrowing of his eyes betrayed the intensity of what had just unfolded. He let the silence breathe, knowing the weight of it would do more than any quick quip ever could. Finally, he straightened his jacket, looked directly into camera one, and spoke. "Well," he said, his voice calm, even amused. "That escalated." The audience broke into nervous laughter, some clapping weakly, grateful for the release of tension. Graham raised a hand to steady them. No, he continued. "Let's be honest here. What you've just witnessed wasn't what any of us expected when we started this conversation. Least of all me. But this is live television. And sometimes, live television doesn't just entertain. It reveals." The studio fell silent again, this time not from discomfort but from attention. Every pair of eyes was on him. Graham leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering, more intimate now. "I've been doing this for a very long time. I've sat across from presidents, prime ministers, pop stars, actors, authors, and more. Some were charming, some were difficult. Some laughed through the tough questions, others bristled at them. But tonight," he paused, letting the words sink in. "Tonight we saw something different. Tonight we saw a man at war, not just with the press, not just with his family, but with himself." A murmur rolled across the audience. Graham's eyes flicked briefly to the empty spot on the sofa before returning to the lens. "I have nothing but sympathy for what Harry has endured," he said softly, sincerity threading his voice. "For what he suffered as a boy, losing his mother under the relentless gaze of the media. For the struggles he's faced as an adult trying to protect his wife and children. That pain is real. That pain deserves understanding." He let the moment hang, his expression solemn. Then his tone hardened slightly, steel beneath the velvet. "But sympathy doesn't mean immunity. It doesn't mean every decision you make is above question. And it certainly doesn't mean walking into a studio, demanding to control the narrative, and exploding the moment someone dares ask what millions of people are already thinking." The audience clapped softly, cautiously, as though unsure if applause was appropriate. Graham didn't acknowledge it. He pressed on. "You see, accountability is not cruelty," he continued. "Conversation is not an ambush. And truth doesn't belong to one person alone. It belongs to everyone willing to hear it, even when it's uncomfortable." He paused again, this time glancing toward the other guests on the sofa. They shifted awkwardly but gave faint smiles, clearly relieved Graham wasn't turning his questions on them. "Now," Graham said lightly, the edges of his trademark grin returning, "I know some of you at home are clutching your pearls right now. Some will say I went too far. Others will say Harry overreacted. That's the beauty of this little red sofa. It doesn't hide the truth. It puts it on display." The audience chuckled nervously, loosening at last. "But let's be honest," Graham added, leaning back now, his grin sharpening into something unmistakably mischievous. "Tonight wasn't about me, and it wasn't even about the monarchy. Tonight was about a man who wanted to tell his truth, as long as nobody else questioned it. And when they did, he walked out. That tells you everything you need to know." The applause was louder this time, more confident, though still tinged with shock. The studio energy had shifted. The tension was no longer unbearable. It was electric, charged, the way only live television could feel when history had just unfolded in real time. Graham shuffled his cards, though he no longer needed them. "We had more to discuss," he said wryly. "A book, a podcast, even a new project. But it looks like those conversations will have to wait." Perhaps forever. He smiled faintly. I suppose that's what they call a royal exit. The audience laughed louder now, relieved to find their footing again. Behind the cameras, producers exhaled audibly. Stagehands who had been frozen in place finally moved, exchanging glances that said everything. They had just witnessed television gold. But Graham wasn't done. He leaned forward once more, his expression sharpening into something serious. "Look," he said, "to Prince Harry, if you happen to be watching this back, and I suspect you will, I say this. I wish you peace. I truly do. I wish you healing. But peace doesn't come from silencing questions. Healing doesn't come from storming out. And respect is earned not by demanding it, but by showing it." The audience broke into firm applause now, some rising to their feet. Graham let it wash over him, but his eyes remained steady, fixed on the lens, as if speaking directly to the man who had just stormed out. Then, with impeccable timing, he let the steel fade, replaced once more by his trademark mischief. "Now," he said brightly, turning back to the audience, "before we all need a stiff drink, let's lighten the mood, shall we? Because I, for one, refuse to let an empty sofa ruin a perfectly good evening." Laughter rippled through the crowd. The cameras zoomed out, revealing the other guests smiling nervously, clearly relieved to be spared further interrogation. "And coming up next," Graham continued cheerfully, "we'll chat with someone who doesn't mind answering questions. At least, not yet." He winked, drawing another round of laughter. The tension finally broke. The audience applauded warmly, the energy in the studio shifting from shock to exhilaration. They knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, the kind of unscripted drama that would dominate headlines, light up social media, and replay endlessly on television for weeks to come. As the cameras panned across the stage, lingering one last time on the empty space where Harry had sat, Graham adjusted his jacket, leaned back in his chair, and let out a satisfied sigh. Live TV had once again delivered what no script could: chaos, confrontation, and a moment that would live on far beyond the walls of that studio. Prince Harry had come to tell his story. Instead, he had walked off, leaving behind not just questions unanswered, but a legacy of spectacle that no one in that room would ever forget. And Graham Norton, he had stayed, calm, composed, unyielding. The ringmaster who had just presided over one of the most explosive interviews of his career. As the applause swelled and the cameras faded to black, one truth remained undeniable. The sofa had claimed another headline, and this one would echo louder than most.